Okay, so next big question. Kind of feel like I'm on a bit of a roll now. Question 7. It's an app that is asking somebody to enter the first, third and fifth letters of their password. So if you think about something like a banking app where you might have, like, you enter your username, enter your password, and then also enter certain letters of your memorable information or something like that as an extra security precaution. That's what's going on here. The top level design is shown below. So we've got 3 steps. It's asking the user for the username, and then it's looking up or finding the password. So I thought this was possibly a little ambiguous, maybe deliberately. The program is finding the password. You're not asking the user to enter the password here, right? So they enter the username, it looks up the matching password. It knows the password, but remember that this out is not output on the screen. It's just, right, the program knows what the password is now, so that you can do the next step. Generate 3 random positions. So these positions are going to be numbers like, say, 1, 3 and 5, or 0, 2 and 4. Within the length of the password. Now it needs to know how long the password is, because if you've got a 20 character password, then your random numbers are going to be different than if you had a 5 character password. And then ask the user for the letters ask the user for the letters at the generated positions and check for a match. So say it wants positions 1, 4 and 6. It says, please enter characters 1, 4 and 6. They type in 3 characters and it checks, are those the characters at the right place? So we're going to complete a data flow. Everybody loves the data flow question, don't we? But thankfully we've got some bits are blanked out, so we don't need to write anything in there. And we've just got 2 blanks here and 2 marks, so we're going to have like a mark for each row. Just going to rub out that out part. So step 1 was the one where they put in the username, it checks the password, and it can then pass that password out to something else. Step 2 is the one that gets 3 random positions, so 3 random numbers in the password. So remember what I said, if it's a 20 character password, it's going to be different random numbers than if it was a 4 or 5 character password. So it needs to know the password. And the reason it needs to know the password is so that it can get the length of the password, so that it can then generate random numbers within that. So right side, generate numbers within the length of the password. That's why it needs to know the password. And then step 3, we've got these random positions, right? These are integers, so these are 3 numbers. It's not the actual letter yet. The user is going to enter their letter, but that's not data flow, because that's not something that's been passed in here as parameters. So user's going to enter their letters, and then we check if they match. So we need to know, right, what the positions were, so that we can say something like enter characters 1, 3 and 5. So we need rand pause 1, rand pause 2 and rand pause 3, because we need to know so that we can show that in a message. But then if we're going to check whether it's valid, we also need to know what are the characters at that point, so we need to know the password as well. Now the reason that we need to know the password is so that I can then do something. If I was going to implement this as code, I could use a substring, and I could say, like, what character is at password, square brackets for a substring, rand pause 1. For example, like, what's password character 0? And then you would check if that matches in an if statement. So that's why we need it. Now, by considering the data flow in part A, explain why it would be appropriate to make use of a function rather than a procedure for step 3. This is a wordy question, and I know that some of you, when you've seen this, panic, you think, oh, I've never seen that question before, and, you know, make it way more complicated than it actually is. Think back to the first thing that I taught you about procedures and functions and what the difference is between them. So a function returns a value, a procedure doesn't return a value. And then look at step 3. Is step 3 returning a value? Well, yeah, because it's valid. So we've got this out. That means that if this was being implemented in Python, you would have a line of code that says return valid. And that would make it a function, because it's a function if it returns. So it returns a value which is a variable valid. Functions return values. Procedures don't. Now, see, it's an explain question, so I've linked it to what's in the data flow, and I'm also not just saying, oh, you'd use a procedure instead, right? I'm saying why, or you'd use a function instead, sorry. So, functions return values, procedures don't. This returns a value, therefore this must be a function. Right, top of the next page, explain why the programmer refers to the data flow in the top level design when implementing the code for the program. So this is another one, it's quite a wordy question. Think to when you were doing your assignment, right, and you get your part B, so here's your page, and you've got all your design that you have to use down there. And at the top of the page, you've got a bit that gives you the name of each function or procedure, and then in and out for each one. Basically, you're getting a data flow for each one, it's just not in a table. So how does that help you as the programmer? That's what this question is asking you. Why do you need to know the data flow when you go to write the program? Well, the data flow in becomes the parameters. So if, this is one of the functions and then it said there in this, you would, oh, right, I'm writing a function or I'm writing a procedure and these are the parameters that are going in. So the answer to the question is data flow in becomes the parameters for a function or a procedure. Out is when it returns a value. Right, over the page, so we've got some actual code here. You've got to know we're not writing the code, but we've got a little bit of code to read. It's not the longest one, so some of the other papers have longer bits of code where you've got essentially the same questions, and quite often you'll find these questions go together. So it'll be something about formal and actual parameters, something about scope of a variable. They'll give you one bit of code and then ask you a few short, 1 markers about it. So I've got step 2, so it's get this procedure, get letters, and then in the procedure I've got a variable called word length. That's an integer variable, and I'm declaring this inside the module, right? It's not outside as a global variable, so it's inside the module, meaning it can only be accessed in there. Got first, second and third, and you see that first, second and third are being passed in as parameters. So if I just switch to my highlighter for a second. Right, first, second and third, well, that's these, right? So these are parameters that are being passed in. Then we've got get letters. So it's going to ask us really, what is this? So get letters up there, get letters, meaning that this down here is calling the procedure and it's passing each of these in as parameters, right? But I'm going to get to the parameters in a second, so I'm going to rub that out for a minute. So formal and actual parameters are used. Identify one formal and its associated actual parameter. The word associated is important. If you look at some of the older past paper questions, it was maybe just like a formal parameter and an actual parameter. They didn't necessarily have to go together as a pair. Now, see I've got there word, right, and then I've got password. And I've got first and rand pause 1, second rand pause 2, third rand pause 3. What matters here isn't that they have the same name. because it doesn't care what they're called. What matters is the order that they come in. And there's a question, I think off the top of my head it's in the 2022 paper, where there's a logic error because the parameters have been passed in for like red and blue in the wrong order. So the order of the parameters tells you what goes together. So word is going to be password. Oops, switch to highlighter. Not very good at this, am I? So word is password. To switch colour first, that's ran_1. So it's the order that they're coming in. So I just pick any pair out of that. So if I go with word as my formal parameter, then password is my matching actual parameter. State the scope of the variable word length, right? So this is word length here. Now word length only exists inside this module. So declare, right? That means that this is the first time that this is used. It can only be accessed inside this module, right? If I try and access it down here, it's not going to work. So word length only exists inside the module, which means that the scope is local. Right? That's an easy question. I mean, basically, you're going to have a 50-50, is that a local or a global variable? The other way that you can write it, though, is to say only accessible in whatever the module's called. Get letters procedure. And that would get you a mark as well. So during testing, it was found that users were asked for duplicate letters, for example letters 1, 1 and 7. Describe how the procedure can be altered to ensure that 3 different letters are requested from the user. So if we look at the code, right, we've got a random number in here, another random number and another random number. Problem is, if you've got a password that's say 5 characters long, well, yeah, your random number might be the first character and then middle character. Might just by chance pick the first character again. That doesn't really work. So instead what we could do is we could check, right? And we could keep generating numbers until we get one that hasn't already been used. Now I've not been asked to write really detailed code for it or anything, but I could just say, right, I want to keep looping until you get a number that's not been used before. Oops, what happened there? So use a conditional loop. And what you want to do is keep looping until the random number hasn't been used already. Now, if you think about the National 5 question, it was like seats on a plane or a train or something, and it was allocating people to random seats, and it kept repeating until there were no more seats available, right? And if the random seat that it picked was already in use, then it would just loop again until it found one that was free, right? That's basically the same idea, but you're not being asked to do it as code. Last part of this question is a systems one, which is maybe a little bit unusual that that's thrown in there. So the users log into the app, the details are transferred securely, describe the role of public and private keys when transferring secure data. Now, you notice that at no point does this question actually use the word encryption. So it's quite hard to write the question without giving away what it's about, but the public key is used to encrypt. So you encrypt the data with the public key because everybody knows your public key or could know your public key, and therefore they could encrypt it with that and send it to you. But something that's been encrypted with the public key can only be decrypted by the private key. And since you're the only person that knows that, nobody can decrypt that and reverse engineer it and get the information out except you. So the private key decrypts.